The city looked smaller from up here, all those lit windows shrinking into something Vivienne Hale could almost hold in one hand. She rolled her wheelchair closer to the glass wall of her office on the 50th floor, the chair's wheels whispering against polished concrete, and watched Manhattan blur into a smear of gold and white, the way it always did when her eyes stung and she refused to let the tears fall. Her phone sat face down on the desk behind her, screen dark, the way it had been for the last 40 minutes. No calls, no messages, not even a text from her mother, who at least usually managed a single line of obligation, 34 years old today, and the only sound in the room was the low hum of the building settling into night. She had told her assistant not to bother with anything elaborate, and Greta had still ordered a small white cake from the bakery on 57th Street, the one with her name piped across the top in pale gold icing, sitting untouched in its box on the conference table. Vivienne had not even opened the lid. There was something unbearable about a cake meant for a party that was never going to happen, sitting there, patient and sweet, while the rest of the floor emptied out around her, one elevator chime at a time, until even Greta had gone home with a guilty look that Vivienne had waved off with a smile she did not feel. Her phone buzzed once against the desk, and her chest tightened before she could stop it. Hope was such a stupid, stubborn thing. She wheeled back and turned it over, and the screen showed not a call but a missed one. A string of texts from a group chat she had been quietly removed from months ago without anyone bothering to tell her. The kind of mistake that happened when people forgot a paralyzed woman could still read. Edmund Hale. She won't notice if we move the vote up. Conference room B. 8 o'clock. Keep it quiet. Priscilla Hale. Make sure Walter signs off before she finds out. We can frame it as concern for her health. Vivienne read it twice. Then a third time, her thumb hovering over the screen as the words rearranged themselves into something with teeth. Her own family was sitting in a room 2 floors below her at this exact moment, on the night of her birthday, discussing how best to take her company out of her hands. She set the phone down very carefully, the way she had learned to do with anything that might shatter if her fingers shook. 18 months since the accident. 18 months since the steering wheel and the rain and the sound her own body made hitting metal. And not once in that time had she let herself cry in this office. She was not going to start tonight. She turned her chair back toward the window instead, toward the city that did not know her name was on 100 buildings and did not care whether she could walk into any of them. And she let herself sit very still in the kind of silence that had a weight to it, pressing down on her sternum like a hand. The intercom on her desk crackled, startling her so badly her hand jerked against the wheel rim. The night security line. She almost let it ring through to voicemail, then thought better of it, because the only people who used that line at this hour were the ones reporting actual emergencies. And even on her loneliest night, she was still the CEO of this building. She pressed the button. Miss Hale, I'm sorry to bother you. The voice belonged to Marcus at the front desk, not the man from her past. Just a coincidence of names she would not register until much later. We've got a maintenance crew coming up to your floor. Elevator bank C is throwing fault codes, and it's tripped a sensor that's tied into the emergency systems on 50. I know it's late. I know it's your floor, but I can't reroute around it tonight. It's fine, she said, and was surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Send them up. She expected a team of men in matching jackets, brisk and impersonal, the kind of people who moved through her building like weather, present and gone without a trace. What she got, 20 minutes later, was the soft double chime of the service elevator and the unmistakable sound of a child's sneakers squeaking against the floor. Daddy, is this her office? It's so big. The girl's voice carried clear and unself-conscious down the hallway, and Vivienne turned her chair toward the open door, in time to see a man in a grey work jacket step into view, a heavy toolbox in one hand and the other resting lightly on the shoulder of a girl who could not have been more than 5. Dark curls escaping a lopsided ponytail, eyes wide with the particular wonder Only children seemed to have left for tall buildings. Mia. What did we talk about? The man's voice was low, patient, carrying the worn-out gentleness of someone who had said the same sentence 1,000 times and would say it 1,000 more without complaint. Inside voices, the girl said dutifully, though she did not lower her volume by much. I'm so sorry. Ma'am? The man's eyes found Vivienne's, and something in his expression shifted. A flicker of surprise quickly smoothed over into professional courtesy. Daniel Reyes. Building maintenance. My sitter fell through tonight. Last minute. And the call came in as urgent. So, he gestured at his daughter with the kind of helpless honesty that made Vivienne almost smile despite herself. She comes with me sometimes. She knows the rules. Stay where I can see her. Don't touch anything that hums. It's fine, Vivienne said again, and found she meant it more this time. The elevator's through there. Take whatever time you need. He nodded and moved toward the service panel near the bank of elevators, setting his toolbox down with the economical care of a man who had done this exact motion 10,000 times. And Mia trailed after him for a moment before her attention snagged on something far more interesting than wiring diagrams. The cake box. She drifted toward the conference table with the unerring instinct children had for sugar, then stopped herself a polite 3 feet away, hands clasped behind her back like she was trying very hard to be good. Is that your birthday cake? Mia asked, looking back at Vivienne with open curiosity. It has your name on it. Vivienne. That's a pretty name. It sounds like a song. Mia. Daniel's voice held a note of warning from across the room, half buried in the sound of him unscrewing a panel. It's all right, Vivienne said, and she rolled herself a little closer, close enough that she could see the careful seriousness on the little girl's face. Yes, it's my birthday cake. Are you having a party? Mia tilted her head, taking in the empty conference room. The single chair pulled out and never sat in. The dark windows, where a party should have been. Children noticed everything and filtered none of it, and Vivienne felt the question land somewhere tender and unguarded. Where is everybody? They couldn't make it tonight, Vivienne said, and was proud of how light she kept her voice. Daniel's hands had gone still at the panel. He did not turn around immediately, but Vivienne saw the line of his shoulders change, the way a person's posture shifted when they were listening harder than they wanted anyone to know. When he finally did look over, there was no pity in his face, which she was grateful for, only a kind of quiet recalculation, like a man adjusting a measurement he had taken wrong the first time. That's a real shame, he said simply. Birthday's not supposed to go uncelebrated. My grandfather used to say a birthday with no cake cut is bad luck for the whole year. He was full of sayings like that. Half of them he made up on the spot, I think. But he said them with so much conviction nobody ever questioned him. He wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket and crouched down to Mia's height. What do you think? Kiddo, you think we have time to help cut a cake before we finish up? Mia's whole face lit up like he had offered her the moon. Can we sing? I don't see why not. Daniel looked to Vivienne then, a question in his eyes that asked permission without making her feel like she needed to give it. And something about that careful, ordinary kindness undid a knot in her chest that had been pulled tight for 18 months. If that's all right with you, Ms. Hale, we don't want to intrude. It's Vivienne, she said, and it's more than all right. They cut the cake on the conference table with a plastic knife Daniel produced from somewhere in his toolbox. The kind of practical foresight that came from years of unpredictable single parenthood. And Mia sang Happy Birthday at a volume that violated every inside voice rule ever established, her father joining in a half beat behind her in a voice that was not particularly good and did not care that it wasn't. Vivienne found herself laughing. Actually laughing, the sound startling her almost as much as it seemed to startle the empty room, which had not heard real laughter in longer than she could remember. She ate a bite of cake from a paper towel folded into a makeshift plate, sitting in her wheelchair across from a stranger and his daughter in a boardroom built for 40 people. And it was without contest. The best birthday she had had in years. "Your grandfather," she said later, while Daniel ran the last diagnostic on the elevator panel and Mia drew looping circles on a notepad with one of the heavy pens from Vivienne's desk. The one with all the sayings. "He sounds like he was someone. He was—" Something crossed Daniel's face. Brief and complicated. Gone before she could read it fully. Marcus Reyes. He built things. Real things. With his own hands. Before people like me just maintain what other people built. He said it without bitterness. Mostly. Though there was a thread of something underneath the words that Vivienne filed away, without quite knowing why it mattered. He's been gone a while now. But the sayings stuck. The panel beeped. Green light. Steady. And Daniel straightened up with the satisfied exhale of a problem solved. That should hold until the full inspection tomorrow. "I'm sorry again for barging into your night like this." "Don't be," Vivienne said, and meant it with a force that surprised her. "You didn't barge in. You're the only one who showed up." Daniel paused at that, toolbox in hand, looking at her for a long moment like he was hearing something underneath the sentence she had not quite said out loud. Mia tugged at his sleeve, already half asleep on her feet, and the moment passed before either of them could decide what to do with it. He thanked her again, gathered his daughter and his tools, and the service elevator doors closed on the small, warm chaos of them, leaving Vivienne alone once more in her dark office with a half-eaten cake and a feeling she could not name, pressing gently against her ribs. Lighter than it had felt in 18 months. By Monday morning, the story had already taken on a life of its own inside Hale Tower. The way stories did in buildings where everyone knew everyone's business and nobody had enough real drama to fill the gaps between meetings. The maintenance log for Elevator Bank C had somehow made its way into a photo, then into a caption, then into a private company message board where someone had written "The new CEO has more heart than this whole building combined," beneath a grainy security still of Daniel and Mia, standing beside Vivienne's wheelchair. 3 paper plates of cake balanced on the conference table behind them. Vivienne found out about it from her head of communications, who delivered the news with the particular nervousness of someone unsure whether to apologize or congratulate. "It's not a bad thing," Sandra said, perched on the edge of the chair across from Vivienne's desk, tablet glowing with screenshots. "If anything, it's humanizing. People respond to it. There's already 300 comments on the internal board, and somebody leaked it to a local lifestyle account. The headline practically writes itself. Paralyzed CEO. Forgotten birthday. A stranger who stayed. I don't want headlines," Vivienne said, though even as she said it she understood the futility of wanting anything about her life to stay private once it had value to someone else. "I want it left alone. It might not be the worst thing right now," Sandra ventured, choosing her words with the caution of someone who had survived enough of Vivienne's moods to know which ones could be pushed and which could not. "The board has been quiet about the succession question for months. Quiet isn't always good. Sometimes quiet means they're waiting for the right moment to be loud. A little public goodwill costs you nothing." Vivienne did not answer that directly, because she did not yet have proof of what she already suspected. Only a string of texts she had read and reread until the words had stopped feeling like sentences and started feeling like a verdict. She thanked Sandra and asked to be left alone for the rest of the morning. And once the door clicked shut, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing in particular, turning over the strange sensation of being grateful for a stranger's kindness while bracing herself against her own family's contempt. 2 feelings that should not have been able to occupy the same chest at the same time, and yet somehow did. It was not left alone, 2 floors below, in a conference room with better soundproofing than the one where Vivienne had eaten her cake. Edmund Hale read the same headline off his phone with considerably less goodwill. He was a tall man, silver at the temples in a way that photographed well, with a kind of handshake that had closed more deals than his actual business sense ever had. And he set the phone down on the table with a controlled precision that told everyone in the room exactly how angry he was without him needing to raise his voice. "This complicates the timeline," he said, looking at Priscilla, who sat with her legal pad covered in the looping, decisive handwriting of someone who had been planning this for months. "We were going to frame the vote around concerns for her capacity to manage stress, her health, her recovery. Now half the board thinks she's some kind of sympathetic figure who got abandoned by her own family on her birthday, which, need I remind everyone, is not entirely inaccurate. And now there's a photogenic single father attached to the story like he walked out of a movie. It's noise," Priscilla said, though her jaw was tight. "We push the vote 2 months, maybe 3. Let the story die down. In the meantime, we tighten the language around the fitness clause. Make sure nothing about this maintenance worker gives anyone ideas about her judgment being compromised by emotional decisions." Edmund's eyes narrowed slightly, an idea forming somewhere behind them that he did not share with the room yet, only filed away the way men like him filed everything. "For later use when it would do the most damage. Find out who he is," he said finally. "The maintenance worker. Full background. I want to know everything about him before this goes any further." Vivienne, unaware of the conversation happening 2 floors beneath her feet, spent the next several days in the unfamiliar territory of looking forward to something. Daniel returned twice that week, once for the follow-up elevator inspection that had been promised, once for an unrelated issue with the climate control system on the executive floor that may or may not have required his specific expertise, though she did not examine that possibility too closely. He had an easy way of talking that had nothing to do with her title or her company, asking about the books on her shelf instead of her quarterly earnings. Noticing the small watercolor of a lighthouse, she kept on the credenza and asking who painted it. Surprised when she admitted she had, years ago, before her hands had other things to do besides hold a brush. "You should pick it back up," he said, standing in her doorway with his toolbox at his feet, in no particular hurry to leave despite the work order in his hand. "The painting. Hands don't forget that kind of thing." "Not really. I don't have time," she said, which was true and also not the real reason. And something in her tone must have given that away because he did not push, only nodded like he understood. There was a longer answer underneath the short one, and was willing to wait for it without demanding it. Mia came with him on a Thursday afternoon when school let out early, and his sitter situation fell through again. A recurring crack in his life that he mentioned without complaint, the way a person mentions weather, simply a condition to be managed, rather than a misfortune to be mourned. She sat up at the small table in the corner of Vivienne's office with a coloring book and a determined focus that lasted exactly 11 minutes before she abandoned the crayons in favor of rolling Vivienne's spare desk chair in slow circles, narrating an elaborate story about a princess who could fly because her chair had invisible wings. "You could be the princess," Mia announced, looking at Vivienne with the easy logic of a 5-year-old who saw no contradiction in the idea. "Your chair has wheels. Wheels are basically wings, if you go fast enough." "Mia," Daniel said from across the room, not quite managing to hide his smile. "That's not really how wings work. It's how I think they work," Mia said with great dignity, and went back to her circles. Vivienne laughed before she could stop herself, a small, startled sound, and caught Daniel watching her with an expression she could not immediately place. Something warm and a little careful, like he was handling something he had not expected to be handed. "She's something else," Vivienne said. "She gets that from her mother," Daniel said, and the warmth in his voice shifted into something quieter, more guarded. "Sophia. She passed 2 years ago. Cancer. Fast. Faster than anyone told us it could move." He said it plainly, without performing his grief for her benefit, which made it land harder than if he had softened it. "Mia doesn't remember as much of her as I wish she did. I try to keep her alive in the stories I tell. The flying wheelchair princess thing, that's pure Sophia. She used to find magic in everything. Even the boring stuff. Especially the boring stuff. I'm sorry, Vivienne said, the words feeling small and insufficient, even as she said them. Everybody's sorry about something, Daniel said, not unkindly, glancing toward his daughter with the particular tenderness of a man whose entire world had narrowed down to keeping one small person safe and happy. You learn to carry it different ways. Some days it's heavy. Some days it's just there. Like a scar you forget you have until somebody touches it. He looked back at Vivienne then. Steady. You don't talk about your accident. I noticed. People usually bring it up themselves. Fill the silence so nobody has to ask. There's not much to say. She turned her chair slightly. An old habit. Angling away from a question she did not want to answer fully. I was engaged. The accident happened the same week I found out he'd been sleeping with my assistant for the better part of a year. He didn't come to the hospital. Not once. I used to think that was the worst part. And then I realized the worst part was that I wasn't even surprised. Daniel was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that did not rush to fill itself with reassurance or pity, which she found she appreciated more than any comforting platitude could have offered. That's not on you, he said finally. Whatever made him capable of that, it lives in him, not in you. People like that, they find reasons to leave, no matter what shape the door takes. You're the only one who didn't, she said quietly, echoing the words from her birthday without quite meaning to. And the air between them shifted into something that neither of them named but both of them felt. A current running under the easy conversation that had nothing to do with elevators or maintenance schedules. He left an hour later with Mia half asleep against his shoulder, the coloring book abandoned and the desk chair still angled where the princess story had left it, and Vivienne sat in her office a long time after the door closed, looking at the empty space where they had been, feeling the particular ache of a person unused to wanting something, and suddenly, helplessly, wanting it anyway. 2 floors down, Edmund Hale received the background report he had requested, printed and placed in a manila folder on his desk by an assistant who had no idea what it would set into motion. He read it once quickly, then a second time slowly, his expression sharpening with each line. Daniel Reyes, 36 years old, widower, 1 daughter, employed by the building maintenance contractor for 4 years. Clean record, unremarkable on every front, except for the one line near the bottom of the page. The one that made Edmund sit back in his chair and allow himself, for the first time in weeks, a small and entirely humorless smile. Paternal grandfather Marcus Reyes, founder, Reyes Engineering, deceased. He did not yet know what to do with the information. Not precisely, but he recognized the shape of an opportunity when it landed in his lap. The way a man recognizes a loaded gun even before he decides whose direction to point it. He picked up his phone and dialed Priscilla's extension. I need everything we have on the old Reyes Engineering buyout, he said. When she answered, the one from 20 years ago, pull the file. All of it. I think we just found our leverage. Priscilla was quiet on the other end for a moment, the sound of her pen tapping against paper, the only thing filling the silence. What kind of leverage? She finally asked, careful in the way she always was when Edmund's voice took on that particular tone. The one he used right before he asked her to help him do something neither of them would put in writing. The kind that ends a vote before it starts, Edmund said, closing the manila folder and resting his hand flat against the cover, as if he could feel the weight of 2 decades sitting underneath it. Just pull the file. Priscilla, I'll explain once I know exactly what's in it. The takeout containers were still warm when Daniel set them down on Vivienne's desk. 3 cartons of pad thai and a small box of dumplings. Mia had insisted on ordering because the menu picture showed them shaped like little gold purses, which she found endlessly fascinating. It had become a kind of unspoken Tuesday ritual over the past 2 weeks. Daniel finishing his rounds on the executive floor right around the time the office emptied out. Mia trailing behind him with a backpack full of homework she rarely opened. The 3 of them eating dinner on the wide mahogany surface of a desk that had once been used exclusively for signing contracts worth more than most people's houses. Vivienne had stopped pretending to herself that this was about convenience or kindness on Daniel's part. It had become something else, something with its own gravity, and she was beginning to understand that she did not want to fight it. She had noticed, over those 2 weeks, the small accommodations Daniel made without ever announcing them. The way he angled his own chair lower so their eyes met at the same height when they talked. The way he held doors a beat longer than necessary, and never once reached to push her chair, unless she asked. Nobody in her life had managed that particular balance before. The difference between care and condescension, and she found herself cataloguing it the way she catalogued everything that mattered to her, quietly, thoroughly, afraid to examine too closely why it mattered so much. "You're terrible at chopsticks," Mia announced, watching Vivienne attempt to maneuver a piece of chicken with the particular concentration of someone who had given up dignity in favor of dinner. "Daddy taught me when I was 4. I can show you." "I would be honored," Vivienne said, setting down the offending utensils with mock solemnity. And Mia scrambled around the desk to demonstrate proper grip with the seriousness of a surgeon explaining technique, her small hands wrapping around Vivienne's larger ones to adjust her fingers. And for a moment Vivienne sat very still, struck by how natural the touch felt, how long it had been since anyone had touched her hands without an agenda attached to it. Daniel watched the two of them with an expression he did not try particularly hard to hide, something soft and slightly stunned, like a man watching 2 pieces of his life fit together in a way he had not planned for and could not quite believe he was lucky enough to witness. "She's been giving me chopstick lessons for a year," he said. "I still hold them wrong. She's given up on me, but apparently you're a project worth taking on. I have more patience than you." "Daddy," Mia said with great authority, returning to her own seat and her own dumplings, already losing interest in the lesson now that it had been delivered. It was during the comfortable lull after dinner, while Mia colored at the small table by the window and Daniel cleared the cartons into the trash, that the moment happened. Small and accidental. The kind of thing that changes everything precisely because nobody saw it coming. Mia had gotten marker on her hands, bright streaks of blue and green, and asked for a tissue with the particular urgency only a 5-year-old could bring to a minor inconvenience. Vivienne reached for the box on her desk and found it empty, then remembered the spare box she kept in the side pocket of her bag, which Daniel had set down earlier near the door, along with his jacket, and, she now realized, his wallet, which had slipped halfway out of the jacket pocket and onto the floor. She wheeled over to retrieve it for him, intending only to set it back on the desk, and the wallet had fallen open in the fall, a small photograph sliding partway out of its plastic sleeve. She did not mean to look. She told herself that later, over and over, that she had not meant to look. But her eyes caught the image before her hands could stop them, an old photograph, slightly creased, of a stern-faced older man standing in front of a brick building with a sign mounted above the entrance. The paint faded, but the letters still legible. Reyes Engineering. Est. Iten Jobai Bashati. Something cold moved through her chest, a recognition she could not yet name but felt in her body before her mind caught up to it. She had heard that name before. Not recently, but long ago, in the particular tone her father used for companies he had absorbed or outmaneuvered or simply erased. A tone that made small things sound smaller. She was still holding the photograph when Daniel turned from the trash can and saw her, and his face changed instantly. The easy warmth of the evening replaced by something guarded. "That's my grandfather," he said, crossing the room to take the wallet from her hands, not unkindly, but with a speed that told her this was territory he did not open easily. "Marcus. I mentioned him before. The one with all the sayings. Reyes Engineering," Vivienne said slowly. Watching his face for a reaction she was not sure she wanted to see confirmed. "I think I've heard that name. A long time ago. From my father." Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing, sliding the photograph carefully back into its sleeve before tucking the wallet into his pocket. A small protective gesture that told her more than words might have. "Wouldn't surprise me," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight it had not carried a moment ago. "My grandfather built half the structural systems in buildings across this city back in the day. Real engineering. The kind that holds things up so nobody falls through the floor. Then a bigger company came along. The kind with more lawyers than engineers, and bought him out for less than his patents were worth. Then quietly pushed him out of his own company within 2 years. He spent the rest of his life trying to get back even a fraction of what he built. Died before he managed it." He said it plainly, the way he had told her about Sophia, without performing the grief for her benefit. But there was an edge underneath it now that had not been there before. "I don't know if your father's company was the one. There were a few big players back then. I try not to think about it too hard. Doesn't change anything either way." Mia, oblivious to the shift in the room, held up her marker, stained hands toward her father with the universal demand of a child who had waited long enough for cleanup. Daniel crossed to her immediately. Grateful, Vivienne suspected, for the interruption, and wiped her fingers clean with the focused tenderness of a man who had learned to find peace in small, repetitive acts of care. Vivienne watched them, her mind turning over the photograph. The name, the careful way Daniel had said, "I try not to think about it too hard," and felt something uneasy settle into the warm evening like a stone dropped into still water, rings spreading outward, slow and inevitable. She did not push further that night, sensing correctly that whatever lay underneath Daniel's careful composure was not something he would hand over easily. Certainly not over dumplings and a half-finished coloring page. Instead, as Mia gathered her things and Daniel shrugged back into his jacket, Vivienne found herself reaching for something to fill the strange new silence between them, something that would feel like care and not like guilt, though later she would understand it had been a little of both. "I want to set up an education fund," she said, the words coming out smoother and more businesslike than she intended, a habit of hers when emotions ran too close to the surface to handle directly. "For Mia, college, whatever she needs. It's the least I can do, given everything you've both." No, the word came out sharper than Daniel seemed to intend, and he visibly reined himself in, though the damage was already done, hanging in the air between them. "I appreciate it. I do. But we don't need charity. Vivienne, Mia is not a project. I'm not a project. We came up here to fix an elevator, and we stayed because we wanted to, not because we were angling for a payout." He picked up his toolbox, his movement suddenly efficient in a way that felt like distance dressed up as practicality. "I'll see you next week. Come on." "Mia." "Time to go." Mia waved a cheerful, oblivious goodbye, completely unaware of the current running beneath the adults around her, and the door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow felt louder than it should have. Vivienne sat alone in the quiet of her office, the photograph of Marcus Reyes burning itself into her memory, the sting of Daniel's rejection settling uncomfortably alongside a growing, nameless dread, and reached for her tablet to do something she should have done the moment she saw that faded sign in the photograph. She typed the name into the search bar of the company's internal records system, and watched as the first document loaded onto the screen. A scanned contract dated 21 years ago. Her father's signature, at the bottom in handwriting she had known her whole life, 2 floors below, in an office considerably less warm than the one Vivienne occupied. Edmund Hale closed a thick folder of his own and looked across the table at Priscilla with the satisfied calm of a man who had found exactly what he had been looking for. "We have everything we need," he said. "Now we just need the right moment to use it." Priscilla flipped through the last few pages of the file, her expression unreadable, the kind of careful blankness she had perfected over years of sitting in rooms where showing the wrong feeling at the wrong moment could cost a person everything. "It's clean," she said finally. "Walter's signature is on the transfer documents, but the original filing that buried the patent dispute, that's Edmund Sr.'s handwriting. If this comes out the way it actually happened, it doesn't just damage Vivienne. It opens the whole family up to scrutiny none of us want, which is exactly why it won't come out that way, Edmund said, closing the folder with a soft, final sound. We control the narrative. We always have. The story isn't going to be about what Walter did 20 years ago. The story is going to be about what Vivienne knew and chose to hide. About her judgment. About a woman so distracted by her own personal entanglements that she let a stranger with a grudge walk straight into the heart of this company without disclosing the connection to anyone. He stood, smoothing the front of his jacket with the unhurried confidence of a man who had already decided how the next month of his life would unfold. Get the legal team drafting language for an emergency board session. I want it ready to file the moment we need it. The emergency board session had been called for 9 in the morning. A time Edmund had chosen deliberately, early enough that Vivienne would have minimal time to prepare a response. Late enough that the rest of the financial world would already be awake to watch the news cycle do its work. Vivienne wheeled into the boardroom at 3 minutes past the hour, having read the meeting notice only 40 minutes earlier, her mind still racing through the implications of what she had spent the last week quietly investigating on her own, never imagining that someone else had already built an entire case around the very secret she was trying to make right. The long table was full. Board members and major shareholders occupying every seat, the air thick with the particular tension of people who knew something was about to happen and were unsure whether to feel excited or afraid. She had not slept more than a handful of hours across the last 4 nights, splitting her time between the legal archive in the basement of the building and her own apartment, where stacks of printed documents had taken over her dining table, each one another fragment of a story her father had buried so thoroughly that even she, his own daughter, had needed days to assemble it into something coherent. She had told no one what she was doing. Not Sandra, not her lawyer, not even Daniel, because some private, stubborn part of her had wanted to bring him the whole truth at once, polished and complete, rather than a half-formed apology that might have sounded like an excuse. She understood now, watching the boardroom doors close behind her, that the silence she had mistaken for care had instead become the very weapon Edmund needed. Edmund stood at the head of the table, a folder open in front of him, his expression arranged into the careful gravity of a man who believed himself to be performing an unpleasant but necessary duty. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "I wish I could say this meeting was called under better circumstances. Unfortunately, information has come to light that I believe the board has an obligation to address immediately, given its bearing on the leadership and integrity of this company." He clicked through a slide projected onto the screen behind him, the photograph of Marcus Reyes standing in front of his engineering firm. The same image Vivienne had seen sliding out of Daniel's wallet days earlier, now blown up and stripped of its context. A piece of evidence rather than a memory. 21 years ago, Walter Hale orchestrated the acquisition of Reyes Engineering through documents that, upon closer legal review, appear to have misrepresented the patent ownership terms in ways that benefited this company at significant cost to the Reyes family. I won't pretend to know every detail of what happened then. What I do know is that the grandson of the man who was wronged has spent the last several weeks in close personal contact with our acting CEO, and that she has said nothing to this board about the connection. A murmur moved through the room, and Vivienne felt the weight of every eye shifting toward her. The particular discomfort of being watched by people calculating exactly how much of their own money was at risk because of decisions she had not made. "I was not aware of any of this until 4 days ago," she said, keeping her voice level through sheer force of will. "I learned of the connection to Reyes Engineering the same way I imagine most of you are learning it right now, by accident. In the course of an ordinary evening, I have spent every day since trying to verify what actually happened. Because frankly, Edmund, what my father may have done 2 decades ago concerns me far more than whatever narrative you're attempting to build around it." A convenient claim, Priscilla cut in smoothly. Given that our records show you initiated an internal records search on the Reyes acquisition the very night you discovered the connection, one might wonder whether that search was about uncovering wrongdoing, or about controlling what comes out before anyone else finds it. It was a clever twist of the knife. Taking Vivienne felt the room's mood shift further against her. The particular vertigo of watching the truth become unrecognizable in someone else's hands. She opened her mouth to respond, but the boardroom door opened before she could, and Daniel stepped through it, toolbox in hand. Having been called up to address a flickering light fixture, nobody on the executive floor had thought to reschedule around a corporate crisis. He stopped just inside the doorway, immediately aware that he had walked into something far larger than a maintenance request. His eyes moving from the projected photograph of his grandfather to Vivienne's stricken face to Edmund's satisfied composure, piecing together in seconds what had taken Vivienne days to uncover. "That's my grandfather," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the room, flat and disbelieving. "Why is his picture on a screen in here?" Edmund did not miss a beat, turning the moment to his advantage with practiced ease. "Mr. Reyes, your timing is remarkable. We were just discussing the acquisition of your grandfather's company by Hale Industries, and the fact that our CEO has known about your connection to that history for several days without disclosing it to this board. Or, I imagine, to you." Daniel's gaze found Vivienne's across the room, and she watched something in him close, like a door swinging shut. The warmth she had grown to depend on replaced by a wariness that aged his face in an instant. "You knew," he said quietly. "Not a question. The wallet, you saw the photo. And you knew. And you didn't say anything. I found out 4 days ago," Vivienne said, wheeling toward him, desperate to close a distance that had nothing to do with the physical space between them. "I have spent every single one of those days trying to understand what actually happened. Trying to figure out how to tell you in a way that wasn't just one more person from my family showing up in your life with bad news attached to it. I wasn't hiding it to protect myself, Daniel. I was trying to figure out how to fix it before I said anything I couldn't take back. You had 4 days," he said, and the words landed harder for how quietly he said them. 4 days to sit across from me and Mia, to eat dinner at your desk, to talk about my grandfather's sayings, knowing the whole time that your family was the reason he died broke and bitter and convinced nobody would ever believe what was actually his. That's not protecting me. That's exactly what people like you have always done. Decide what the rest of us deserve to know, on your own timeline, for your own reasons. That's not fair," Vivienne said, her voice cracking around the edges despite her effort to hold it steady. "I am not my father. I didn't do this to your grandfather. And I have spent the last 4 days trying to find a way to give back what was taken from him. Not bury it deeper. Maybe not," Daniel said, "but you're sitting in his chair, behind his desk, running the company built on what he lost. And you let me believe you were just someone who got left alone on her birthday, when really, you were the person standing closest to the reason. My grandfather spent his last years fighting a war he never had a chance of winning." He looked around the room then, at the rows of expensive suits watching him with the detached curiosity of people observing a spectacle that did not threaten them personally, and something in his expression hardened further, as though the room itself confirmed every reason he had ever had to keep people like this at arm's length. "I used to tell myself it was different with you, that you weren't like the rest of them. I should have known better. People like you don't change what they are just because they're kind to a kid for a few weeks. That's not who I am," Vivienne said, her voice rising despite herself, the desperation of being misunderstood by exactly the person whose understanding mattered most, cracking through her usual composure. "I have spent 4 days trying to find a way to make this right. Not bury it deeper. Give me a chance to explain before you decide what kind of person I am." He looked at her for one fraction of a second longer, something flickering across his face that might have been hesitation, Might have been the beginning of a question he was not ready to ask in front of a room full of strangers. Then Edmund cleared his throat, deliberately, redirecting the room's attention before Daniel's doubt could take root. And the moment closed as quickly as it had opened. "I didn't come here for this," Daniel said, his voice quieter now, almost tired. "I came to fix a light." He set the toolbox down hard enough that the sound cracked through the silence of the room, then turned and walked out without looking back, leaving Vivienne to watch the door close on him for the second time in this story. Except this time it did not feel like a small, sweet mercy. It felt like the exact shape of every abandonment she had ever survived, returning to finish what it started. The room erupted into a low roar of conversation the moment the door shut, board members leaning toward one another, already reshaping the morning's events into whatever version best served their own positions. And Edmund allowed himself the faintest smile, certain he had landed the blow he intended. Vivienne sat very still through the noise, her hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair, hard enough that her knuckles paled. The sound of the closing door still echoing somewhere behind her ribs, louder than anything happening at the table. For one long moment she let herself feel the full weight of it. The particular, familiar collapse of watching someone she had let herself trust walk away without giving her the chance to finish a single sentence. The same collapse she had felt 18 months ago in a hospital bed, waiting for a man who never came. It would have been easy, in that moment, to let the grief swallow the rest of the meeting, to let Edmund's narrative stand simply because she no longer had the strength left to fight it. But Vivienne, even through the sharp, private grief of watching Daniel walk away, felt something else surface beneath the pain, a clarity she had not expected to find in the middle of an ambush. She thought of Marcus Reyes, a man she had never met, who had spent the last years of his life fighting to be believed, and she thought of her own father's signature at the bottom of a document designed to make sure he never was. She was not going to let that signature win twice. She reached into the leather folder she had brought with her, the one she had assembled over the last 4 sleepless nights, and set it on the table with a steadiness that silenced the room faster than any raised voice could have. "Before this goes any further," she said, "I think the board should see what I actually found when I searched those records 4 days ago. Because it isn't what Edmund just described. And I think everyone in this room deserves to know the difference between what actually happened and what's being sold to you as truth." Edmund's smile faltered for the first time that morning, the smallest crack in an otherwise immaculate performance. And across the table, Priscilla's pen went very still against her legal pad. The folder Vivienne opened on the boardroom table did not contain what Edmund expected, and the room learned that fact slowly, page by page, as she walked them through 4 sleepless nights of work with the same precision she had once used to close billion-dollar acquisitions. The first document was a formal inquiry she had filed with the company's general counsel, dated the morning after she first saw the photograph in Daniel's wallet, requesting a full audit of the original Reyes engineering buyout. The second was a memorandum she had drafted, outlining a proposed restitution package for the Reyes family, including back compensation calculated against the patents her father's company had absorbed without proper credit, along with a public statement acknowledging the original wrongdoing. The third document silenced the room completely. It was an internal transfer authorization, dated 3 days earlier, moving funds into an escrow account established in Marcus Reyes's name. The paperwork already signed and notarized, waiting only for the family's acknowledgement before disbursement. "I was not hiding this," Vivienne said, her voice steady now, carrying the particular calm of someone who had stopped fighting for permission to be believed and started simply presenting the truth. "I was building it, quietly, because I did not yet know how Daniel would feel about being told that the company employing his father, the company maintaining the very building he works in, was the same company that destroyed his grandfather's life's work. I wanted to bring him something real, not an apology with no weight behind it." She turned her gaze fully toward Edmund, and something in her expression had hardened into a kind of resolve that had not been there an hour earlier. What I would like the board to consider instead is the document underneath all of this. The original 1,995 transfer filing. Look at the signature authorizing the patent reassignment that buried the Reyes claim. It isn't my father's signature alone. She slid the final page across the table. And Edmund's composure finally broke. A flicker of something close to panic crossing his face as board members leaned forward to see what she was pointing to. A second signature beside Walter Hale's, dated the same day, belonging unmistakably to Edmund Hale. 20 years younger, but unmistakably his own hand. You signed the documents that buried this, Vivienne said quietly. Not just my father, you. Which means every word you've said this morning about my judgment, about my integrity, was never about protecting this company from scandal. It was about making sure nobody opened a file that has your name in it. The room dissolved into chaos. Voices overlapping. Board members already pulling out phones and murmuring to legal counsel. And within the hour, an emergency vote that Edmund had engineered to remove Vivienne instead produced a different outcome entirely. A unanimous motion to suspend Edmund pending a full independent investigation into the original acquisition, with Priscilla resigning her board seat before the vote even concluded. Unwilling to be tied publicly to a scandal she had only ever helped manage rather than commit, Vivienne remained exactly where she had been the entire morning, in her chair at the head of the table she had inherited and very nearly lost, not because anyone had taken pity on her, but because the truth, once fully visible, had simply refused to be anything other than what it was. She did not see Daniel again that day, or the next, his absence sitting in her chest like a held breath she could not release. She thought of reaching out a dozen times, and stopped herself a dozen times, understanding now, with a clarity that came easier in the quiet aftermath of vindication, that an apology delivered too soon after a wound was just another way of asking someone to manage her feelings instead of their own. She let the silence sit, painful as it was, and threw herself instead into the work of making good on the restitution she had promised, meeting personally with the lawyer, overseeing the Reyes family compensation, insisting that the public acknowledgement of wrongdoing be unambiguous, carrying her father's name and Edmund's in equal measure, refusing every suggestion from her own legal team to soften the language for the company's benefit. The press, predictably, found the whole arc irresistible, and for a week her name appeared in headlines that no longer used the word paralyzed as a kind of pity, but instead framed her as the woman who had dismantled her own family's cover-up rather than protect it. A story with teeth instead of softness. Walter Hale called her exactly once during that stretch. His voice clipped and wounded in a way that asked for sympathy without ever once apologizing, and Vivienne found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she felt very little obligation to give him any. She had spent her whole life trying to earn a kind of love from her family that had never actually been available to earn, and dismantling that particular hope, however painful, left behind a strange and unexpected lightness. Room enough finally to grieve the family she had wished for, instead of the one she had. It was Mia who broke the silence. In the end, arriving at Vivienne's office on a Thursday afternoon without warning, marched in by a building security guard who had recognized her from her many previous visits and assumed, correctly, that whatever brought a 5-year-old to the executive floor alone deserved an exception to protocol. She climbed up into the chair across from Vivienne's desk with the gravity of a person carrying an important message, her small hands folded in her lap. "Daddy's sad," Mia announced, without preamble. "He thinks you don't want us anymore because of the bad stuff with the company. I told him that's silly because you're not the company. You're just you. But he didn't believe me, so I came to ask you myself." She tilted her head, studying Vivienne with the same unfiltered seriousness she had brought to every conversation since the night of the cake. "Do you still want us?" Something cracked open in Vivienne's chest, gentle and overwhelming all at once. "More than almost anything," she said, her voice unsteady. I have wanted to come find you both every single day. I was afraid your father needed time before he wanted to see me. He always needs time, Mia said, with the weary patience of a child who had clearly weathered her father's grief before and learned to wait it out. But I think he's done needing it now. He's been staring at his phone a lot. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, having tracked his daughter's location through the app on his phone with the particular panic of a parent who had momentarily lost sight of his entire world, and found her sitting calmly across from Vivienne. The two of them sharing a plate of crackers Vivienne kept in her desk drawer for exactly this kind of unscheduled visit. He stopped in the doorway, breathless, relief at finding Mia safe, colliding visibly with the awkwardness of standing in this office again, in this particular silence that had been growing between them for nearly 2 weeks. "I am so sorry," he said, looking at Vivienne over Mia's head, the apology carrying more than just the immediate one. "She's not supposed to wander off like that, and I owe you a much bigger apology than that. For what I said in that boardroom, I watched the news coverage, I read the restitution filing. You did exactly what you said you were doing. And I didn't give you the chance to say it before I walked out." He crossed the room slowly, like a man unsure whether he had earned the right to close the distance. "I spent 2 years after Sophia died convinced the only way to keep myself and Mia safe was never to let anyone matter enough to leave a mark if they disappeared. And then, you didn't disappear. You stayed. You fought. You gave my grandfather back something I never thought anyone would bother giving him. And I walked out on you the same way everyone in your life always has. The one thing I swore I'd never do to anybody. You were grieving something real." Vivienne said softly, "I understand that better than most people could. I just needed you to come back." "I'm here," he said, and meant it the way a man means a vow rather than a sentence, settling into the chair beside Mia, close enough that his hand found Vivienne's across the desk without either of them quite deciding to reach for it. "If you'll still have us." A year passed in the particular way good years do, quickly in memory and slowly in the living of it, full of small, ordinary things that felt extraordinary simply because Vivienne had once believed she would never have them. The investigation concluded with Edmund's formal removal from the board and a settlement that fully restored the Reyes family name to every patent and project Marcus had built. His story finally told correctly in the company's own archives. Vivienne kept her seat as CEO, not as a symbol of sympathy, but because the shareholders who remained had watched her handle a crisis with more integrity than the men who had tried to bury her, and trusted her with the company because of it, not in spite of her chair. On the night of her 35th birthday, Vivienne wheeled herself toward the same floor-to-ceiling window where she had once stood alone watching the city blur into gold and white, and found the room transformed. String lights looped along the bookshelves, a cake on the conference table with her name written across the top in pale gold icing. The box already open this time. 3 plates set out instead of waiting untouched. Mia met her at the door in a paper crown she had made herself, insisting that birthdays required crowns and that this was a rule with no exceptions. And Daniel stood near the window with 2 candles in his hand, ready to relight the ones Mia had already blown out twice by accident during the setup. "No empty chairs this year," Daniel said, watching Vivienne take in the room, the warmth in his voice carrying the particular steadiness of a promise already proven rather than merely spoken. He crossed to her, crouching to her eye level the way he always had. The same easy, unhurried respect that had undone her resistance. The very first night they met. "I love you," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious fact in the room, more certain than the skyline behind them or the company that bore her name. Not the office, not the title, not any of it. You, just you, exactly as you are. "I love you too," Vivienne said, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the words carried no fear underneath them, no waiting for the door to close behind someone walking away. Mia climbed into her lap with the casual confidence of a child claiming her place in a family she had decided, long before either adult had caught up. already belonged to her, and together the three of them sang Happy Birthday in a room, finally, completely full.